Why specifically should people go out their way to spend their dollars on Black films?
There are people that came before Ryan Coogler that gave him an opportunity to see that you can make films with people that look like us. And, you know, so there were Black filmmakers that came prior to him that he was able to see that, and that gave him an opportunity to say that he could dream bigger, he could do more, he could be more, because he saw people that looked like him making films with people that look like us, telling our stories. Also, there is something to say when culture is represented. It allows people to see that we're not a monolith, that because especially if we just look at the stories he's told, right? If we start with Fruitvale, I don't know how many of you have seen Fruitvale Station. The way he told that story, and he's such a young filmmaker too, it was very documentary style. It's like a day in the life of Oscar Grant. So you got to see how he spent basically like his last 36 hours of life, you know, between, I would say 72 to 36 hours, or 36 to 72 hours of life. And I thought that it was just so beautifully done, because even though he was a person that struggled with his demons, you saw someone that wanted to have a better life, to do better for himself. And I think that's one of the many things that I respected about that project, was that, because that's the thing, when, unfortunately, when our unarmed Black men are killed, the first thing people go to, look at his record.
Yeah.
Look what like we, you know.
Dehumanize us.
They dehumanize us. And you don't see that with people of other cultures, unfortunately. They die, and somehow you find heroic things about them, and they could have been hardcore criminals.
Yeah.
You don't even hear that about them. But with our men and our women that die, it's like we always go into the depths of the darkness, you know, that unfortunately plague all of our lives. There's all parts of all of our lives that have pieces of darkness in it, but for some reason ours have to be unearthed every time that we're killed or whatever have you. And I think that that's the thing that I loved, is that he showed the humanization, and you know, he showed that this person at its core is just like any other person you run into every day. And this was a young man that wanted to do better in his life and didn't get an opportunity to, and was so young.
Yeah.
When he lost, he was also a father. So I think that's another thing too. I feel like with Creed, I always say this because I felt like that was something I noticed in watching the Rocky films as an adult versus watching them as a child. I remember thinking that Apollo Creed was kind of this flashy boxer that always had like a lot to say. Every time he got his hands on the mic, it was like, okay. And, you know, because of how that he was portrayed in those films versus like who he might have really been, you didn't always get to see that, I feel, with it through a white lens. But I feel like when you saw as an adult and you look at the Rocky films, he was very successful as a boxer. Like Rocky had made money at one point, right? Like Rocky had a mansion and cars and had all these endorsement deals. Rocky lost all his money. I still don't even know how he lost his money. Like that was never explained. But do you feel like you learned that in the film?
I mean, I'm pretty sure they probably threw it with a one-liner or something like that. But if in the amount of money, I guess if you look at the lifestyle he was living when they showed him with the cars and the furs and all that in the previous films, I guess they assumed that he mismanaged it.
But like Apollo Creed wasn't like a boxer that wasn't. He was dressed to the nine. Like every time you saw him, he was dripping. It wasn't like he didn't know how to put a piece together either, but it showed that he knew how to manage his money.
I guess he didn't take care of his kids.
He took care of He took care of his kids.
At least not one.
But what was cool was that we got to see that here was a kid that might not have had, the earlier part of his life was very humble, but then he got an opportunity to be raised, you know, by his father's widow in an environment where he was exposed to so much more. Yeah. And I think that the coolest part about it was they paid homage to the fact that he did well with his money. You know, Apollo Creed wasn't out here looking crazy in these streets. But also, so you got to see this complex character who has somewhat of a chip on his shoulder, that he didn't necessarily grow up the way, you know, earlier parts of his life, he didn't grow up the way his brother and sister did. Because I know Apollo Creed had children in the film. They always showed kids. And then he addresses it in the third film that his siblings in the home weren't the kindest to him. But then that he also could navigate the neighborhoods maybe even his siblings couldn't go into. Yeah. So I think I definitely like that. And they showed that, like those layers of that culture too, and how he really learned Philly when he was filming in Philly. Like you weren't going to just see, you saw Philly from a different lens than you saw in Rocky. Mm-hmm. And then with Black Panther, it was very important for him to stay very true to to different parts of African culture that he infused in that. And that's something he's doing as well in Sinners. And Denzel Washington even talks about this, that we should see more Black directors telling Black stories. Is one, it allows people to get to know us as a culture differently. I mean, it's just like when people go to see a Steven Spielberg film and they see it from a Jewish lens, then you get to understand parts of his culture, his background that you may not understand without him telling that story. Yeah. And I think that that's why it's important to support Black filmmakers in the stories they're telling, that specifically that infuse so many parts of our culture in that, because it'll give you an understanding as to who we are and why we're so layered and why we're so proud as a people.
I think one other thing is keeping the Black dollars in the Black community type of thing, yes, right? Like understanding the more money we spend on our own products, the more opportunities we'll get, the more businesses we can open, the more productions we can have with people who look like us as well. So, going out, and I know, like, I'm not trying to, especially because there may or may not be a recession. I'm not trying to say, spend something that you don't have, but if you do have it to spare and you're going to waste it on something trivial, go support a Black movie, and a Black movie with a Black director and a Black lead and a Black writer and a Black producer, like this is a rare opportunity to actually see original Black film in a horror genre. Obviously, one of the most popular was Get Out. So this is another opportunity to watch another one, and you see how well Get Out did and the cultural impact it has, and this is an opportunity for us to have another cultural moment.